Hi, everyone. Welcome to Waste 360's Nothing Wasted podcast. On every episode, we invite the most interesting people in waste, recycling, and organics to sit down with us and chat candidly about their thoughts, their work, this unique industry, and so much more. So thanks for listening and enjoy this episode. Hi, everyone. This is Liz Bothwell from Waste 360 with Melissa Gregg, Chief Technologist, User Experience and Sustainability from Intel. Welcome, Melissa, and thanks for being on the show today.
It's a great pleasure to be with you, Liz.
So we normally start at the beginning on this podcast. So could you please share a bit about your background and your journey to Intel?
Oh boy. Okay. That is quite a journey. It starts on a little island at the bottom of the world. I grew up in Tasmania, Australia, and I was on a farm looking out to Antarctica for the first few years of my life. And then I decided, well, what do you do when you grow up on an island? To amuse yourself, you read books. So my long story short is I read a lot of books. I ended up going to university. I ended up becoming an academic for the first part of my career. So that took me all over the world. And I managed to get some really great research training as a postdoc and as a faculty member in Australia. Then I was recruited to Intel by another Australian, an anthropologist named Genevieve Bell. And she had an amazing lab at that time of social scientists and designers who were doing really cutting-edge research and all about the future of technology, which is what I had been studying as an academic. So it was a kind of seductive proposal to come to America and come to Silicon Valley and learn how technology is actually made, because that's really what I wanted to do. I wanted to take what I was learning from my research and really influence how technology was being designed. So that's what I got to do when I joined Intel. Eventually, I started off doing some research collaborations with academics, but now I'm working full-time in the business. So working alongside the engineers and people who design the next products.
Amazing that you made that jump from academia to corporate. How's it going for you?
Well, it's been a while now. It's definitely been a pretty big transition, and some days I wonder whether I've really fully succeeded. But I do maintain a lot of collaborations with my academic colleagues too, because I think that nerd instinct is pretty strong. So I still read a lot of books, and I still accidentally write them too. So it's something that has been a real passion that's hard to let go.
I love hearing about the work you're doing, and the customer experience work in particular is so interesting. Can you talk a little bit about that and ultimately how you're using those critical customer insights to be more sustainable at Intel?
Yeah, well, so the thing that we do in the PC business at Intel, user experience research, starts with ordinary users of our technology. We sort of go into people's homes, into their workplaces, where they use technology, and we take from those interviews and observations, recommendations and insights based on what they need, what they tell us they enjoy or what they want more of. And when I was doing research for one of our big laptop innovation programs recently, Project Athena, one of the observations that was very prominent in the interviews we did, particularly in Europe, but also in some parts of the US, was people were really starting to express an interest in more sustainable designs for technology, and were feeling a little concerned that they couldn't get access to more sustainable designs on the market at that time. So we've seen over the years, people becoming more aware of their own consumption habits and the effects of those consumption habits, and people having, seen examples of more sustainably designed products. The Fairphone is one example in the hardware technology area where people are starting to see explicit branding the companies are showing, the full production behind that device as part of what they stand for. So we've sort of seen a trend in some of our research over the last couple of years where we're seeing a younger generation wanting that from the PC business as well. So that's the direction that our work's taking on the PC business at Intel.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. That makes sense. I feel like the younger generations are insisting that brands make changes, and ultimately that will help all of us, especially the planet. Now, how much of that work was centered around reuse? I know you've tweeted about it, and it's a big question at the end of life, that reusing pieces and products will help, obviously, to divert out of the landfill. How much are you doing around that?
This is my new area of focus, because I'm so strongly of the belief that we have to complement the traditional methods of market and user research that we've inherited over the years with a more active focus on designing for reuse. And what I mean by that is, up until now, the way that we've done a lot of that product development process has been focusing on the most, advanced, sophisticated user who already knows, what they want from their PC and has very specific expectations. But there's a whole lot of people in the world who don't have a PC, who don't have the latest PC, who can't afford it, and are currently underserved. I mean, we've really seen that playing out during the COVID pandemic, where, even in local community settings of our own colleagues, people have been quite surprised to see how difficult it's been for kids to connect to school, for multiple workers in a household to get connected at the same time. So the idea of reuser experience is to bring a design mindset at the beginning of how we think about products, so that we're always assuming that this device will be reused after the first instance. So I think we've had a bit of a linear model of, making the product, selling it, and disposing it. But in a lot of the language that your listeners will be familiar with around circularity or circular economy principles, instead we need to think about how can we keep this device, this really crucial set of resources that's been put together in this thing, how can we keep that circulating? How can we keep those dimensions of how a system is received by a user in circulation for as long as possible? And then at the end of life, or how many lives it may have, I mean, we may need to start using about metaphors of cats or something, having 9 lives, but 9 could be a stretch at this point. But I think we have to really try and maximize the full utility and capacity of the device, and realize that it's a collective computing opportunity as opposed to an individual user's experience. So that's essentially the difference in mindset that I think reuser experience as a method can help us see, is that it's not my personal experience that this device is destined to fulfill forever. It's actually, I get the first opportunity, and I want this to be something that others benefit from too. That's what reuser experience design can give us.
Oh, I love that idea. And I really hope we get there, because that's critical to do at the beginning stage of life. And like you alluded to, a lot of our listeners, they're focused on circularity, and because they've dealt with the end of life of these products for decades and decades. And now to hear someone like you at Intel who's actually thinking about this from the design stage is a beautiful thing.
Well, I think that the thing that's really exciting from my point of view is when you sit alongside the engineers and the architects, who are the ones that really get to, cook up the recipe, so to speak, for how the PC's inner brain and functions get programmed in the first place. That's really an important place to have the conversation, because, it's really our customers and our partners who make the devices themselves, the case and the shell and the screen and all those sorts of things. But to bring it to life, at the PC platform level, or even all the way down to the silicon, you have to be having those conversations all along the way. And that's the thing. As a social scientist, I've had to take some time to learn, who has what role at what stage in product design. So that's something I'm really enjoying learning and sharing with others.
Oh, I bet. Oh, that's great. And the importance of bringing those stakeholders together, right? And really talking about what's in it for all of you at each phase. So I love that you're doing that. And then in Intel, you guys recently outlined your 2030 RISE strategy for your corporate responsibility goals for the next decade. Can you talk about that and your role in that?
Yeah, I have the privilege of being on the Tech Impact Steering Committee for RISE, and RISE stands for Responsible, Inclusive, and Sustainable Design Enabled by Our Employees. So the acronym itself is optimistic and hopeful in this idea of RISE, because we want to inspire our colleagues as much as our industry on aiming for these goals. But the thing that I guess is really exciting from my point of view is the way in which RISE brings together all of these different aspects where Intel can play a role in the industry. So when you're working at the level of silicon, and as I said, with engineers deciding the features that go into the technology, you do have this, this privilege and responsibility to enable the right kinds of features. And when it comes to the way that we build products, I was thinking about this in your previous questions too, that it doesn't take much to encourage an engineer to try and make something more efficient. So energy efficiency has always been a really big part of how people understand sustainability in tech and in hardware in particular. But what RISE is also encouraging us to do are a range of initiatives that are about bringing the full circularity to the production of those chips in the first place. So how we work with our fab leaders to manage our fabs responsibly, how we bring safety to employees who are working in those fabs. And there are other parts beyond where I work in the PC business that are also about, enabling the autonomous vehicle revolution and using technology in a way that's going to encourage a safer road environment. There are energy and sustainability benefits to that too. If you believe all that hype that we're going to have a lot more intelligence in the transportation sector. So, the thing that's so great about RISE is that it's capturing all of the ways that Intel contributes to the industry, because it has a lot of businesses beyond just the traditional PC now. And I think that's the exciting part too of working in a big company, is that you have the chance to influence the direction of a company that has global implications. It has a lot of people who use the products across the world, but also employs a lot of people in the production and in the supply chain side of things. So it's a big program with a big ambition, and by 2030, it's also how corporate responsibility goals tend to work on these decade-long targets. It gives you a chance to really build some fundamental infrastructure for bringing out what it is that we think are the priorities that the industry is asking for.
Absolutely, that's so important. And like you mentioned a little bit there, I like how Intel goes beyond their own sustainability goals. I read that you actually have rules in place for your suppliers to do the same. And did the pandemic affect your supply chains at all for any of the work that you're doing?
Well, from my point of view, sitting in the PC business, the pandemic is one of the things that really helped accelerate what I was already interested in exploring around this idea of reuse, and particularly how people are dealing with the prolonged or ongoing expectation they have for their devices when they can't necessarily buy a new one, right? So there has been a very well publicized silicon shortage, which has many, many factors involved. But part of it is simply the fact that, you have factories unable to operate when it's not safe for employees to be there. And I think what's interesting too is it prompts new kinds of awareness amongst ordinary users like us, that there is a kind of an effect of supply that we're not always expecting, when we're trying to place that order for when we want something to arrive. What I've been interested in when it comes to that question of how am I going to get the new PC is what it is that people are doing to work around it. And this use of secondhand PCs is something we've done a study on. That's what I was working on this morning, the presentation for that research study, and seeing how people are starting to use different kinds of platforms, like using lots of online platforms to redistribute and resell PCs and get access to PCs when they're trying to educate their kids at home and that sort of thing. I think there's just been a lot of awareness raising amongst people around what that knock-on effect of the supply chain can mean, and how we all have to think about ways to be resilient, to make use of the compute resources that are already out in the world.
Absolutely, and I think you're right. The awareness has just gone up astronomically. One of the silver linings of the pandemic, I would say. And
I don't know how many there are, but yes.
Yeah, exactly. We've had a Bloomberg columnist named Adam Minter on this show, and he has spoken at some of our events. And he was Asia-based before the pandemic, and he always talked about how PCs, the value over there of each little piece and each little metal within, was so much higher than the way that we viewed it here. And do you see that at Intel, and do you see it eventually coming back this way, or is it just a different way of thinking based on culture and the people in need?
I'm a huge fan of Adam Minter, so I'm really glad you mentioned him. His books on the secondhand trade in all kinds of goods and materials has been a big influence on my thinking when it comes to reuse. And the way that he has done such pioneering journalism around the markets around circularity that are already in existence. I think one of the really strong points he makes consistently is, I think the European and American policy landscape has started to talk about circularity quite recently, when in practice it's been the reality in many countries and economies for a very long time, because there is a lot of innovation that comes out of constraint, and there's a lot of opportunism that comes depending on, your access to resources in the first place. So what I love about his work is its international perspective, and its ability to point out some of the biases in even how we talk about economies, right? So when we were doing research informed by his work this past year, it was looking at definitions of waste, because when you're starting to talk about e-waste regulations, and this could be like way too detailed and nerdy for you, but it's really interesting how it's the most wealthy countries who get to determine the concept of waste in the first place. So like for a lot of the ways that e-waste is regulated internationally across borders, it seems to be based on whether somebody in a wealthy country has decided, I just don't want this anymore. So therefore, it is waste. Therefore, it has this category, this binding category that then, means that certain conventions apply. Obviously, the point I was making about reuse is it's not going to be waste for somebody else who may be able to use that device if there's nothing actually wrong with it. It's just that you wanted a newer one. And it's those sorts of cultural sensitivities that I think journalists like Adam Minter are really brilliant at uncovering. And it's also another reason why ethnography and anthropology is really important to thinking about sustainability and our own biases.
Absolutely. And I think you're doing it at the right time, because I think you'll see the shift, the pre-pandemic shift, the during the pandemic, and then where we are after, especially with all of these aggressive sustainability goals that many companies, beyond even Intel and tech, have for themselves. So you have a great bird's eye view. I can't wait to hear more as you ride this out and watch and research.
Well, the thing you have to get a lot of people past in the business mindset, I think, is whether this idea of reuse is jeopardizing the original market, right? So, a lot of people talk about they use these horrible words like cannibalizing, right? So we're going to cannibalize the primary market for PCs if we have a secondary PC market. It's like, no. They're different people who are serviced by those different markets, and it's growing awareness of the capabilities of what a PC provides for people who haven't ever had one. So I think, going back to that idea of the linear model, I think we've had this fairly linear idea of adoption, that people only ever buy the best. But I think for the idea that I'm trying to bring across, at least, it's starting to build a vocabulary where we recognize that just because I'm finished with something doesn't mean it can't be useful for others. So I think we have to try and find a way to catalyze that instinct in people to do good and to also pass on things that they've benefited from. Then there's definitely a way that the research we've done suggests people do want to know that the device they had has gone to a good home, or has gone to another useful recipient or beneficiary of this device, that they've cared a lot about themselves, but they've also paid for. There's a return on investment calculation too. So whether you're looking at it from economic standpoint or you're looking at it from a feel-good standpoint, I still think you get to the same conclusion. Like, let's design these things for more than one user.
Definitely. And it's interesting you say that, and you may already be doing it, but is consumer education part of what you're trying to do here? Because communication is so key, and we see it on the recycling end. You could have communities where an education program is rolled out, and the success rate will go up 25% quickly, just because they were educated about it and they knew what bin it was going to. And I just can't help but to think if Intel were to do that, you would have a great result.
Well, I'm not in two minds on this one, because I've certainly read enough research on recycling now to realize that the amount that we invest in that relative to what we should be doing to stop bringing so much stuff into our house in the first place, it's a little bit of a rearranging the deck chairs kind of on the Titanic idea. But that's one of the sobering things about studying sustainability long term, is that it's the further up you go in the production and manufacturing process that on the whole, at scale, the more effect you can have. But that's not to say that we shouldn't be doing everything we can to make people aware of their role. Okay, so if we do get the chance to show people that keeping a PC in their closet for a couple of years actually means that those resources that went into that PC are trapped and will not be able to be used again, because there's all kinds of things that happen in those 2 years, like you forget the password to get it to turn on in the first place. There is something really important about making people see their personal connection to, the extraction that goes into making the metals that go into that device, and that they are essentially now trapped resources in the form of your PC. And I know there's a lot of really important e-waste activism happening on this front where, whether it's through different ways of appealing to people's sense of safety about donating devices, or, getting people to see how it can help transform the life of somebody who's never had one. There's lots of different emotional as well as practical things that we should be doing to try and make people feel motivated to bring those devices back. And that's a big factor in what a lot of the OEMs, or original equipment manufacturers, as they're called, the PC providers are trying to do is bring those devices home.
Yeah, and some are doing a great job. So I'm sure you're including a lot of that in your presentation that you said you're working on too, to see who's doing it and who's doing it well.
Yeah, it's actually amazing how many services are actually already in place. But as you say, whether people are aware of it is one issue. And then secondly, whether people have time to actually go through that process. It's something that we haven't really spent a lot of time on. And again, it comes back to designing an experience. Like, what is the experience of saying goodbye to a device? I really draw on anthropology when I'm thinking about this as a problem, because it's a ritual opportunity. When you focus a lot on getting the new thing, but we haven't really created a ritual about setting something free or letting go of your device. And I think if we use some of those, really powerful ways that we know humans interact with time and meaning, and how things have played a role for a certain period of their life, we could have some more success. But it's one of those things when you work in tech and you're a humanities trained person, you sort of realize how many ways those human touch points are not part of the conversation. It's more reflective of the lack of diversity in these industries that we're also trying to address.
That makes sense. And we talked a little bit about regulation. Do you think there should be more regulation around reuse and recycling of PCs, or do you think we need more standards in place? At least here.
Oh boy. How long have you got for this topic? I have a lot of thoughts in this area, and it's partly because I've been working with some amazing research scholars who do specialize in this. And what they've made me learn, thinking of people like Josh Laporsky in Newfoundland, who's got the book Reassembling Rubbish. There are others who've gone into this in even more detail, but he talks about, the global e-waste regulatory landscape and has helped us learn about that too. And what's fascinating, the more you look at it, is just how he uses the word incommensurable, how even the words and the terms and the definitions of waste, as we were talking about earlier, don't all map onto each other the same way, depending on jurisdiction. And also, when you're talking about somewhere like the United States, it's not easy to have any federal influence. It's all state-based regulation. So it's very different where I grew up in Australia, where everything is federally required as opposed to state-based. So you really have to come to terms with the context, and the nuance of the setting for things to become a regulatory question or not. And what concerns me, I suppose, in what I'm observing over time in industry is regulation tends to be what creates, immediate change in how things are done, how business is done. But we haven't been in a very strong context for regulation in the United States, at least in the years I've been here. So I think it requires a lot more passionate scrutiny, because we do need more help in encouraging the right process for waste and disposal. I think there's progress being made, and there are a lot of motivated people in agencies that they're trying to get us into the right path. But I think you need a number of things. You need regulations, you need standards. At the moment, they don't seem to be working particularly well when it comes to waste. So I've learned in the business world that another way of looking at these problems is it's an innovation opportunity. So I see a lot of activity now happening with startups and sustainably minded entrepreneurs who are they're just going to start building businesses around this because they care about it. They're not going to wait for the regulation in the way that a more dinosaur company might be waiting for the heavy hand of law to respond. I think we can count on this new generation who are starting companies to innovate around these limitations and hopefully translate to better standards too.
I think you're right about that too. And then switching gears a little bit, I saw that you recently published a book called Media and Management. Can you talk a little bit about that? That really intrigued me.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I did mention that I still maintain my academic connections. So this was a book that came out of a COVID lockdown situation where I had some colleagues who had a lot in common in terms of their research interests on it is actually related to the supply chain and the history of producing technology and manufacturing. And this book is a group of scholars who are all interested in looking at the legacy of management techniques in the factory, particularly in Japan, the rise of Toyotism and just-in-time production, and how that started to influence the way that software design happened much later, in the 80s and 90s, and moving into the more recent platform economy that we're seeing with app-based delivery and all of these different things that were happening during COVID brought these topics together, manufacturing, supply chain, software-enabled delivery apps. The book is exploring the history that got us to this point, and the language of just-in-time delivery is something that, as academics, it's very fun to interrogate, because a lot of our ideas of delivery and on-demand services, we can trace back to some of those changes in manufacturing that came out of Asia. So that's another nerdy pursuit that I continue to focus on, because my research has always had an interest in management theory, and that's something that, again, I think has been helpful to navigate a large company.
Oh, I bet. And I love all that. You call them nerdy pursuits, but I think they're fascinating. I love it.
Well, yeah, it's one way of passing the time in lockdown. Not everybody decides to write a book across 3 continents, but there you go.
Exactly. And then do you have any advice? I mean, customer experience is all the rage now, regardless of type of company or industry. And you dig really deeply into this. Do you have any advice for managers and people who are doing this on a sort of a more peripheral level, how they can take their customers' experience and translate that into either a better experience or more sustainability? Any advice you have really would be wonderful.
Well, I think my advice coming into business and corporate life from such a strange path in some ways, where I think a lot of what I do at Intel is point out the interests of those who aren't in the building or now in the Teams or Zoom call, because I think a lot of industries tend to suffer from a desire for things to stay the way they are if things are going well, or for things to improve if they're not going so well. And how you get closer to your customer or your user really has to involve approaching them where they are, as opposed to where you wish they were or where you want them to be. So the methods that we use in ethnography, and market insights and research tend to be all designed to cut through, the hype of targets and projections, and really just talk in detail, person to person with a user of technology to see what's their day like, what motivates them, what are they trying to get done, because ultimately your product or your service needs to be trying to help them with the things that they've identified as their priorities, rather than them needing to recognize what it is that you're selling as a solution to that. And yeah, I think it's really experience-based design and even experience-based marketing. I mean, both of them have a long history at Intel, but when it's done well, it's really about allowing people to see that you're responding to what their ordinary expectations are each day. And we don't know that at scale. We can only do that in specific encounters that we have with people, and ethnography is a really great tool for that.
Oh, that's great advice, and so true, regardless of industry, right?
Yeah, it's about popping the echo chamber effect of market research and projections, and really remembering who it is that's going to benefit from what it is you're trying to offer them.
I love that. And your customers are lucky to have you and your team there to put them first always. That's huge.
I'm smiling. I'm blushing.
So tell me, what's next for you? What's next in Intel's sustainability journey?
Well, for me personally, one of the things I'm very excited about is our partnership with nonprofits right now. So the research I'm leading at the moment is working with one of our coolest nonprofits in Portland, here in Oregon, Free Geek, who do PC refurbishing and help bring more people into the computing world by giving away and donating refurbished PCs. So working with them brings me so much joy. And the thing that, it really makes me realize is that you can not only help people with an initiative that's around sustainability, but you're helping the planet by keeping those resources moving further and further through a system. And I just love that. I think that we've done that partnership with Free Geek out of a long-standing relationship with donation at corporate level for Intel, and that's something that Intel does in a number of different locations. Arizona too is another place where we have a nonprofit present. So that to me is, really important, because sustainability is about being mindful of where you are, where you're physically located and that environment. So it can have the nicest policy at global level, but if it's not also attached to where you are and the environment you share, it's not really going to be that authentic. So that's the thing I'm focused on, and I hope that that's one of the examples that continues to inspire more, because we still have a few years left until 2030.
Oh, I bet. And that will spread and will be an inspiration for others. I love that you guys are doing that.
Yeah, well, that's my message for everyone from this conversation is donate your old PCs. Don't leave them hanging around.
Well, your timing is impeccable, because my husband just got himself a new PC, and we were trying to figure out where to take the other one, whether it was an e-waste day in our community or what, but we will certainly take care of that.
Well, the other thing you could do, I know that it's International Repair Day next weekend. I think it's October 13th. So depending on the timing of your broadcast, you could take it along to a repair cafe and see who would like to use it as a way of training others on making reuse a reality. So that's another thing that I'm really excited about too, is seeing how many people are becoming independent entrepreneurs of their device use. I think that's a really important thing that we've learned about COVID is, you can never be too resilient. independent in provisioning yourself.
Amen. That is so true. Well, is there anything else you want to share? I'm sure you have a busy day, and I appreciate all your time today.
I think I'm good. I really enjoyed the conversation. I hope we covered what you wanted to, and looking forward to diving into more of your archives as well, so that I can be inspired by others.
And thank you for your time today. It was really informative, and please keep us updated as you continue your amazing work and what you discover along the way and how you're tracking to sustainability goals. We would love to learn more as you go. Well, thank you, and it was wonderful to meet you, and stay well, and I hope you get to go home soon. Oh, well, I hope to chat with you soon, and thank you again.
Okay, thanks a lot. This was great.
Thank you for listening. It would mean the world if you would take a moment to rate or review this podcast. And if you share it with us on one of our social networks, we are giving out some fun, nothing wasted podcast swag. So just tag us and see what you get. Thanks so much.